welcome to Stories Found. Each week we feature funny stories, plays, and sketches from some of the most talented comedy writers in the world. I'm your host, Ava Love Hanna, a writer and humorist in Austin, Texas. Joining me is my writing partner, audio engineer, and all-around cool guy, Paul Hanna. You're listening to Stories Found. Our featured organization this week is one of our very favorite shows, Testify, a live storytelling show in Austin, Texas. The amazing crew at Testify love stories, hearing them, crafting them, and sharing them. Each month, Testify offers a live show featuring true stories told by the people that lived them. If you're in the Austin area and have a story to tell, they'd love to hear it. You can submit your own story to one of their themed opportunities on their website, testifyatx.com. Or, if you're just in the mood to hear some really fantastic stories from past shows, check out their YouTube channel, Testify Austin. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Stories Found. This week we're talking to Mark Gifford and hearing his hilarious story, The Brink of Chaos. Mark has been a full-time professor of composition and rhetoric at the University of Texas at San Antonio for 18 years and counting. He's also a producer for Testify, a monthly storytelling show in Austin, Texas. Mark is the co-creator and co-producer for Like Minded Lunatics, where he helps create a weekly television show for Austin Music TV, as well as short-form video content for the Like Minded Lunatics YouTube channel. When Mark finds himself with free time, he enjoys trying to remember his own name. Mark is charming, funny, and a heck of a storyteller, and we're so excited to have him here today. Hey, Mark, welcome to Stories Found.
Thank you so much for having me, Ava. I'm really happy to be talking to you.
Well, we're really excited to have you here today to chat about your story, The Brink of Chaos. And this story it's hilarious. So thank you. Thank you so much for submitting. And tell Lottie, I heard Lottie told you to submit to us. So tell him thank you from us.
I will do.
So without giving too much away, give us a little bit of information. What are we going to hear today? What's in your story?
So my story is really about how, as a young man entering college, I was introduced to a guy who really kind of changed my life and changed the way that I looked at education and changed the way that I kind of saw how classrooms were run. Mm-hmm. And after I got out of graduate school and started teaching at UTSA, I really wanted to try to emulate his demeanor, the way that he was able to conduct class, the way that he was able to interact with students. I was always in deep admiration of that. And there are two scenarios that really tested my ability to do that. And so that's really what the story is about. Those two episodes where I was on the brink of chaos, and I won't spoil whether or not I was able to bring it back.
Well, honestly, it's such a good story, but it has these twists and turns, and it ends with this hilarious ending, and that I honestly didn't see coming.
I did not either. Just to clarify, I did not see it coming either.
That's what I think makes it so perfect, because you go through sort of this journey with us and you take us, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I felt so sorry for you for that day. So how did you know when this happened? And I always wonder, was it at the time or later? How did you know you're like, this is a story I need to tell?
Immediately afterwards. This was, I talk about two scenarios in the story, two small scenarios, and both of them were scenarios where, leaving the classroom, I was immediately looking for my friends to go, you will not believe, I need to decompress. Can we go get beers? Because I have to talk to somebody about what just happened.
Exactly. That's how you know it's a good story, when you're like, I got to tell someone this right now.
Yes.
And so being a college professor, I think anyone who has spent any time in a classroom knows that these weird, hilarious things happen all the time, even if they maybe, aren't funny to us right when they happen. But it's this pressure cooker of sort of humanity. So you have a storytelling goldmine there, huh?
Yeah, I think so. It's a never-ending font of misadventures in a classroom. And it really does take a certain personality to not get just either beaten down by it or just completely frazzled. So I'm lucky in that I have other outlets that allow me to kind of decompress. But yeah, it's just a never-ending series of misadventures.
Well, and I think it might also be a little bit of a double-edged sword, though, right? You have all these opportunities to see people and see these stories sort of writing themselves in front of you. But that means there's also a lot of eyes on you and what you say at a storytelling event or a podcast episode. Like, so how does your career inform your storytelling? But then how do you balance, that other aspect of it?
That's such a great question. So I do teach writing. I teach composition and rhetoric, and I mean my master's degree was in literature. So at heart I do think of myself as a writer and as a critic of literature as well. But also think of myself as an educator, and part of that I think is performance. So it's really kind of a double question about how I view writing stories in my head, and also how I view my role in front of an audience.
Yes.
And honestly, I think both of those objectives are pretty much the same in front of a classroom and in front of an audience telling stories or doing live events. I've got a goal. I want to take the audience through. Now, in a classroom, obviously, that's going to be, student learning objectives. But at a live show, I want to make them laugh, or make them sad, or make them feel how I felt in the middle of a moment. And so, in my head, the jobs are exactly the same. I think it's just how I present myself.
That's fantastic. And then again, so then how do you decide, like, oh no, what if a student would recognize themselves in this tale? So sort of pulling back and trying to change things to be sort of like an everyman situation, I guess.
That is a fear that I have, because there is a very clear difference between Professor Gifford and Mark that you meet out on the street.
Right.
If I can digress for just a moment, you might find this funny. The second semester I taught, midway through the semester, my wife and I went to a concert. I was in San Antonio. We went and saw Rob Zombie. And the next day in class, I was in the middle of class, and one of the students raised her hand, and she said, "Professor Gifford, did I see you at the Rob Zombie concert last night?" And in my head, I had one of those Family Guy moments where it cuts to what I look like, just going completely berserk. And immediately I went, "Rob who?" And we transitioned out of that. I am sometimes concerned, but I feel like in both of the stories that I told here, at least the ones that I am okay telling on stage, I think the students would be okay, because we talked about it afterwards. So
right. Well, that is. I mean, you are still a human. You have to go out into the world.
For sure.
You're going to run into them. Well, I would say one thing that I love about storytelling is finding out neat little details about someone like that I might not have thought to ask, and getting to put together that puzzle of them. For example, you're a professor and a producer and a content creator, but I never would have guessed that you come from this really, really small town. and your story tells us this beautiful tale of your journey from that small town, that small town to the classroom. How do you decide when you're writing a story, what parts of my life sort of add to this? What do I include about myself?
It's all about what informs the final act. I still kind of view the stories in the same way I would like a 3-act structure. So if something doesn't really affect that final portion, I just omit it, because it turns into a different story.
Oh, yeah.
So that school that I talk about that's a book unto itself.
Yeah.
It was so just to clarify for folks, I don't think I say it in the story, I'm not entirely sure, but the school where I graduated from, we had 170 students about, and that was K through 12. Wow. In my graduating class, there were 11 people, but one guy didn't make it. So at normal graduations, if someone doesn't graduate, no one knows. But literally on stage, we could hear people whispering, "Where's Jacob?"
Oh, no.
So it was incredibly small. And we were also in this weird geographic area. There was basically a juvenile detention center. We call it a boys ranch, that was about 15 miles away from us. And a lot of times we would get overflow from the boys ranch. And so we would have folks who had real disciplinary issues. And like I said in the story, I saw many fights at school between students and a number between students and teachers. And it was a really traumatic place to kind of go to high school and grow up. So it's hard to not want to tell people that, because I know it's so outside of most people's experiences, but it also draws away from the story itself. So if I want to talk about an incident that happened at UTSA, if I dive too much into my high school, no one's going to hear UTSA.
Exactly. But at the same time, I will say that as much as you included it in this story, it really does change. I think to see that part, and then to see where you become this professor trying to really maintain a certain experience in a classroom, it really does inform that. So it's fascinating to have those little details about you.
Oh,
So
thank you so much.
you're welcome. Well, okay, so I love to find out how people found out about storytelling. Because for me, I was an actor and I was a writer, and then I was like, I don't really feel like acting anymore. And then I was writing essays, and I got invited to be in a show, and I was like, what is this? And I found out that storytelling existed, and I get to make eye contact with the audience, and I loved it. How did you find out about storytelling?
In kind of well, through one of my closest friends. So in UTSA, I've got my writing partner. We did several audiobooks together and several live events where we
Mm-hmm.
did kind of old school radio plays. One of our friends is a musician at
Mm-hmm.
Texas State, and Ricky would do live scores for our stories and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Todd got my writing partner got involved with Worth Repeating, which
Mm-hmm.
is Texas Public Radio's storytelling series down there, and he became one of their story coaches. And I had my mom passed away, and he wanted me to tell a story about that. And so he kind of twisted my arm a number
Mm-hmm.
of times to get on stage. And it was a really transformative event because it allowed me to open up on stage and take an audience through something I had written while also connecting with them on a deeply emotional level. And so it wasn't like a classroom in that I was imparting information, but it was more about imparting emotion. And that was something I don't think I'd experienced in front of an audience before.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
or at least not to that degree.
Right.
So that was a really transformative experience. So my friend Todd Wright worked for Worth Repeating, and those guys down there were really, really great in San Antonio. And it was a great experience.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad that you found your way to storytelling, because your stories are fascinating. So, okay, so since you have a writing background as well, who are some of your writing and storytelling influences? For me, I'm always like, oh, it's sort of a combo of like George Saunders or Ira Glass, or who is it for you?
I don't think any of the stuff I studied in graduate school, as far as tone and voice, affects what I
Mm-hmm.
do now. I
Right.
was 100% focused on John Milton, so Paradise
Mm-hmm.
Lost and Aeropagitica and stuff like that in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got interested in composition and rhetoric, so basically teaching students how to write. So I
Right.
don't know that any of those writers, I mean, obviously they may have in a roundabout way, but it's George Carlin. I can't
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
without talking about anybody else, it has to be George Carlin. His ability to pivot from a fart joke to PTSD, a bit on PTSD,
Uh-huh.
will never cease to amaze me. His ability to pivot from the most psychologically disturbing thing about our society to, like I said, fart jokes.
Right.
Brilliant. So
He does. He covers the whole gamut of just the human experience. Really, I think he's brilliant. So that's an excellent answer. I love it.
yeah.
Okay, so not only are you a fantastic storyteller, you're a producer for Testify, and Testify is one of my very favorite live storytelling events. What is it like getting to work with other storytellers all the time now?
It's fantastic because, unlike my students, they are so appreciative of any type of notes or help that I can provide for them. So the number of times someone has gotten off stage and went, "Thank you for that. That really worked," is so gratifying versus, "Can I just get 2 more points?"
Exactly.
No. So acting as a story coach for Testify is way more gratifying than being a college instructor.
It's funny too, because I do know when there would be times where I'm writing, I'm like, I remember being in grad school or whatever, going, I'm never writing again. I'm never writing again. And now I do it as a job. So yeah, it is funny to sort of see that experience. So, okay, final question. And it's probably the most important one. Did the presentation that took your class to the brink of chaos get a passing grade?
Yes, it did. When they redid it, if I remember right, it got either a C plus or B minus. I can't remember which one. It wasn't great, but it was good enough to pass.
Perfect. They had a recovery, and that's all that matters. So you did bring everything back.
I'm not going to say that. I'm going to let your audience be the judge of that, Ava, because I don't know that happened.
Well, Well, I think we'll let everybody decide. They can give us their final verdict. But I think you did an excellent job. So, and I'm glad to hear they passed. Well, Mark, it has been fantastic talking to you today. And we are so thankful to have you here on Stories Found.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I'm really, really happy to be featured. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We know you love Stories Found, but have you ever sat and wondered, wow, how can I let other people know just how much I love Stories Found? Well, fortunately, we're here to help. Head over to storiesfound.com/support. We've got a list of fun, free, or even paid ways to show your support and to help us keep paying our amazingly talented writers and actors. Soon, the whole world will know just how much you love comedy and supporting the arts. Head over to storiesfound.com/support. Stories Found is now proud to present The Brink of Chaos by Mark Gifford.
So I have had a lot of bad teachers in my life, and as an educator myself, I don't say that lightly. Part of the reason why was because the high school where I graduated was absolutely horrible. And I know a lot of people say that, but I know that mine was probably one of the worst. For one thing, the school I graduated from was absolutely tiny. We had about 170 students, K through 12. We were also in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by cotton fields. We were essentially 35 minutes away from the nearest sheriff, and I know that because they had to be called regularly for fights. And most of the time it was fights between students, but I have seen my fair share of fist fights between teachers and students. And in hindsight, I think we had about 3 types of teachers there. The first type was a teacher who had just graduated from college and needed any job on the resume. The second type was a person who was raised in that little farming community and never wanted to leave. And the third type, and the most common at that school, were teachers who could get hired nowhere else. And so they ended up in our little farming community. And there was very little learning that took place. The classrooms were absolute chaos. So when I found myself at Baylor trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I eventually decided that I might want to be a teacher. And when I decided that, I started making a notebook in my head. And on one side, I started writing down things that I never wanted to do as an instructor, ever, based off of things I had seen in my past. And on the other side, I started trying to make a list of things I wanted to do or teachers I wanted to emulate. So my first semester at Baylor, I was talking to my advisor, and I was instructed that I had to take a physical education class, which blew my mind. I was an English major. Why in the hell do I have to take PE? But in any case, I had to do that, and they gave me a list of things I could take, and I said, I'll take bowling. And they went, no, bowling is full. Bowling is always full. You can't take bowling. Take something else. So I looked down the list, and I thought, okay, if I can't be Big Earn McCracken from Kingpin, I guess I'll take karate and be Daniel LaRusso. So I decided to take karate. And it was the luckiest accident that ever happened in my entire life. I learned so much from that class and that instructor. For one thing, my wife and I fell in love because of that class. But for another, I met an instructor who literally changed my life. So the instructor of that class was a guy by the name of James Melton. James Melton was a third-generation Shotokan karate practitioner. Shotokan karate is one of the 4 original karates from Okinawa. Its founder, Gichin Funakoshi, took karate from Okinawa, transformed it into an academic curriculum to be taught in universities in Tokyo. And so it's highly regimented and designed to be taught to college students. So that was James Melton's past. That's what he had learned to do, and he'd been taught by old Japanese guys. In addition to that, he had degrees in education, and he had taught in all kinds of classrooms, from elementary age students to juvenile detention students. And James Melton had this unique ability to bring a class back from the brink of chaos. I'd never seen anyone be able to do it. He also had this unique ability to admonish behavior, but not the character of the student. And there's something very important about that. And so after I graduated from graduate school and took a job at the University of Texas in San Antonio, the thing that I kept in my mind was James Melton's ability to bring a class back from chaos. It didn't matter what it was. Students talking, he could bring them back. Students arguing, he could bring them back. And I wanted to channel that as an instructor. And that ability has been tested a number of times. The first time it was really tested was a few years after I started at UTSA. I was in the middle of a lecture, and before I begin, it's important for you to understand I have a very strict attendance policy. One of the things I learned from Melton was that 80% of learning any new skill is showing up. So we have a strict attendance policy. So I'm in the middle of a lecture, writing on the whiteboard, students behind me dutifully taking notes. And the layout of this room isn't great because the door to get into the room is over here in the corner. So that means that if a student comes in late, which is annoying to begin with, but if they come in late, they have to walk past me and past the classroom to get to their seat. So it's doubly intrusive. Writing, students taking notes. The door swings open. Immediately, I am enraged. But I try to hold it in, try to remain stoic. I look up at the clock. It's 17 minutes after. That's not a tardy. That's an absence. But I decide to myself, you know what? Let the student get to his chair or her chair, and I'll deal with it after class. Best not to make a big disruption about it. So the student starts shuffling, is the best way to put it, to the seat. Now, normally when students come in late, they got a little bit of a pep in their step. Not this one shuffling like a walker from The Walking Dead. And then I hear from behind me the entire class gasp. And it wasn't a gasp of, oh my God, Professor Gifford's about to chew this guy out. It was a gasp of, oh my God. So I turn around and look. And by this point, the student has shuffled almost over to his seat. And it's a student who has had trouble with absences in the past. But when I look over, that's not what's concerning to me. What's concerning to me is the cut. Now, the gash that starts right here in the middle of the forehead and ends about right here at the top of his head, and the copious amounts of blood pouring down this kid's face. And the other students are freaking out, rightfully so. Students don't want to touch him. He's wavering. He gets to his seat and he plops down, and it's obvious that he's not focusing on much. And I'm like, Andrew, are you okay? What has happened? No response, just wavering. And I've seen concussions. That's what they look like. So I run over and I get in front of him and I go, Andrew. And he starts to focus. What has happened? And he looks at me and he says, I can't be late again, Professor Gifford. Please don't fail me. I'm like, Andrew, let's not worry about that at this point. What has happened to you? And he just keeps wavering. I can't get another tardy, sir. I can't get another tardy. And at this point, students are freaking out, so I stand up and I tell one of my athletes, I want you to take Andrew over to the Health Services Center. You're going to have to help him. He's not going to be able to do it under his own power. I want you to run ahead of them. Tell the nurses over there we've got a student who has been injured. Everyone else, please sit down. We're going to finish class. I'll give you an update on Andrew later. And I felt proud of myself. I felt proud because I was able to bring the class back. I was able to make these students feel safe. I was able to get help for Andrew. And I was later told that the reason that Andrew was in fact late for the class, or was injured, was because he was late for the class, and in his haste, he ran out in the middle of traffic and was struck by a car. And apparently, the only thing that his concussed brain could remember was, "Don't be late again." So I was proud of that too. And I felt like James Melton would have been proud of me as well. But there was another incident that really tested my ability to bring a class back from chaos, and I'm not sure if I did. So we're in the middle of student presentations, and student presentations are a big deal in my class. I expect them to be multimodal, so they have to use PowerPoint slides and audio and video and all that type of stuff. And they have to give the presentations extemporaneously, so no notes. You have to actually memorize what you're supposed to be presenting. But the room we were presenting in was horrible. It was one of the oldest rooms in UTSA, no technology. It was just a box of concrete. That was it. So every day before class, I'd have to put in a work order for a portable screen and a portable projector so that the students could hook everything up. And it's important to understand the layout. So at the front of the room, portable screen. Right in the middle of the room, portable cart with the projector. And then the students would have to stand in front of the projector so they wouldn't obscure the screen. Hopefully that makes sense. So a group is presenting, and I think they're presenting over something about pollution. I don't really remember that part. But they're in the middle of their presentation. It's time for one of their videos to be played. And it was a video, I do remember this, about pollution in the Atlantic Ocean. So the guy whose computer it is, Eric, starts to walk around, and he turns on their video, and he comes back, and his group continues to present. Unfortunately, the video that Eric started was not a video about pollution in the Atlantic Ocean. It was a porn. And it wasn't a porn between two people having sex. It wasn't a porn between three people having sex. It wasn't a foursome even. It was a porn with a, how to describe it? Pile or mountain of greased up, beefed up, sexy dudes just going right at it. And let me be clear here, I have no problem with a group of dudes getting it on. In fact, if I'd been at home, I probably would have watched the entire video, if for nothing else, to admire the athleticism. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was it was playing in the middle of my class, and the students immediately flipped out. There was one girl that just went, "No!" And there was a bunch of people who were laughing. And in my head, I'm like, but I have to just say, I have to remain stoic. I have to just go, turn it off. Eric, turn it off. Now, the real funny part is this group has no idea what the hell people are going crazy for because they're not looking at the screen. And so Eric turns around and he immediately turns back and goes, "It's my sister's computer." I'm like, "No one gives a shit, Eric. Turn it off." And so he runs around. The entire group's freaking out. He runs around, and unlike a normal person, Eric doesn't just hit the X button. I've never understood this next part of the story. It's completely true. Instead of just hitting the X button, he starts punching keys, and then the sound comes on. So now, not only are we watching the video, we are inundated with sounds of moans and groans and wet sounds, and people are now just leaving. Eric is flipping out. He stopped trying to turn the damn thing off and just keeps going, "It's my sister's." I'm like, no one cares. So he finally gets it turned off. And at that point, I make the executive decision, we're done. We're done for the day. There's no way I'm getting y'all back. So we're going to resume next class with the same group. Eric, no porn. No porn next time, Eric. And it was that day that I learned that no matter how hard I try to channel James Melton, there are some forms of chaos I will never get a class back from. Thank you.
You've just heard The Brink of Chaos by Mark Gifford. This version was recorded at the live storytelling show Testify in Austin, Texas. If you've enjoyed today's show, we'd love it if you gave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's quick, it's easy, and it makes us feel pretty. We'll have a post on our website with more information about Mark and how you can follow his many, many very cool projects. You can find all of that on storiesfound.com. Thanks for listening to Stories Found. We've been your hosts, Ava Love Hannah and Paul Hannah. Get more info about this week's episode, subscribe to our newsletter, or submit your own story and be a featured storyteller in a future episode. You can do all that and more on our website, storiesfound.com. Stories Found was recorded at ELA Studios deep in the heart of Austin, Texas.